Hello, my name is Darren, aka Skipper D, and today I want to talk to you about an injury that I sustained about 3 months ago while sailing on Lake Lanier. I was on not this boat you see behind me, which is a 14-foot compact picnic cat. I was on a 27-foot Catalina. I was sailing solo on the lake and I got hit in the head with the boom. This was a serious injury, though it could have been far, far worse than it was. I actually turned out to be okay, and the least possible damage happened to me. It could have been a far worse injury, but it still had repercussions, and I want to talk to you about this. So I'm going to be talking to you about what happened, how I got myself in that situation, the extent of the injury, going to the hospital, the ER, the scans, my recovery, and what I will do differently in the future to ensure that that never happens again. But before I get into all that, there are two things that I want to say as a preparation or introduction to all of this. The first is that if you should ever sustain a head injury, or you know somebody who sustains a head injury, this must be taken very seriously. This is nothing to play with or to ignore or to just brush off. If you get hit in the head, or your crew gets hit in the head, or anybody you know has a head injury of any sort, I urge you to seek professional medical assistance immediately. Even when a person looks or sounds as if they are okay, there can be things going on inside the skull that you will not know until you get a scan to get checked out. You could have trauma to the brain, internal bleeding, skull fractures, and so on that you won't see or know unless you get, for example, a CT scan. So please take this very seriously and get medical attention as soon as you can. The second thing that I will say is that, fortunately, I actually captured all of this on video, but I will not be sharing that video here, and maybe not ever. There is both a good and bad, or positive, negatives of having this on video. Mostly positive, I would say, but there was a reason why I'm not going to share that on YouTube. The positive is that I was able to go back and watch the accident happen objectively. I could see exactly what went wrong, the moments leading up to it, and deconstruct the entire incident so that I could be clear in my mind of what actually happened. There's an interesting phenomenon that happens, or at least happened to me, in that what I experienced versus what actually happened were two different things. My perceptions, they were my perceptions. I perceived what I thought happened, and the way even time unfolded was very, very different than what actually happened when I watched the video back. So to have that video and get an objective sense of reality was gold for me to properly deconstruct the incident and figure it all out. So from that perspective, it was awesome to have the video. What is not so awesome, I guess you could say, and the reason why I will not be sharing the video here on YouTube, is actually seeing myself get injured is emotional. I guess you could say there's some trauma. It's difficult to watch somebody actually really seriously get hurt. And to have captured that on video, it's difficult to watch it back. And I think for myself, I actually wanted to see it back, as I mentioned, so I could get an objective view of it. But I think for my friends and family who just were to see that, or even for some viewers, if I were to just show this on YouTube, I think it would be upsetting to some people. So for those reasons, I'm not going to share it, but I will talk about exactly what happened and try to paint the picture so that you might get a sense of what happened and how you might find yourself in a similar situation and what to do so that you don't experience this. So with that, let's talk about what happened. The day that this happened, it was in February, so it was the middle of winter. I'm located near Atlanta, Georgia, so winter here is far milder than winters up north, and we actually have the ability to sail in the wintertime here on Lake Lanier. Generally speaking, there are some days when it's either too cold or the conditions are too harsh to go out, but there are many good sailing opportunities in the winter, and we actually get some pretty decent winds in the wintertime, so it's actually a good time to go sailing if you can bundle up and protect yourself from the elements. So it was a winter sailing day. The winds were coming out of the northwest. The lake is positioned sort of at a diagonal. It runs northeast to southwest. And so with winds coming out of the northwest, it was a perfect day to have a beam reach almost all the way up the lake and all the way back. So I didn't have to tack back and forth up the lake. It was just single beam reach all the way. Made my way all the way up the lake, turned around, beam reach all the way back. But coming back into the marina, I was going downwind. So I had the wind behind me as I came back into this area known as Big Creek, which heads back into the Holiday Marina where my sailing club is. So I'm coming back in toward the marina and I'm trying to lower my sails. I made several mistakes. First mistake I made was to disregard the way I had been trained to do this. So of course, in your ASA 101, 103, 104, you are taught that when you bring the sails down, particularly if you're solo sailing, but in any case, you should point up into the wind. Like, duh, obviously, like that's what we're all taught, and that's what most people should do in most cases. So you point your bow into the wind. This makes your mainsail luff and your headsail, and then from there you can bring the sails down or furl the sails or what have you. I had heard somewhere, maybe in a clinic or something, somebody mentioned, oh, you can bring your sails down if you're going downwind. Let's say you're on like sort of a run or you're like on a deep broad reach, and the mainsail is blocking the wind from your headsail. Your headsail is going to lose power, and that might be a good time to like bring that down. So I thought to myself, hey, that's a technique I've never done before, and I want to try it. So instead of pointing upwind to bring my sails down, I was downwind and wanted to take my headsail down first. So that was my first mistake. So here I am going downwind. I've got the mainsail out on, the boom is on the port side, and I'm trying to furl the headsail. It was on a roller furling. So in order to do that, when I furl the headsail, I like to make sure that it is furled tightly. I don't like, and the club doesn't like, for the sail to be very sloppily furled with the roller furling. So you kind of have to be in control of two things at once. You need to be in control of your jib sheets, and you need to then also be in control of your furling line. So while I'm pulling on the furling line, I'm trying to maintain tension on the jib so that as I'm furling, the sail is furling tightly. So I forget what happened, but the sail wasn't furling as tightly as I wanted. So I moved in front of the helm into the middle of the cockpit while I was trying to, I think maybe a line had gotten caught or something like that. And I went to go handle and pull the jib sheet while I'm pulling the furling line. And while I'm doing this, the bow on the starboard side was catching the wind. And so what happened was the wind started pushing the bow downwind. I think you can see where this is going. Therefore putting me at risk of an accidental jibe. So for those who don't know, an accidental jibe is when the mainsail jibes, which is the stern of the boat is going through the wind, and the sail can suddenly fly across to the other side of the boat. So the boom is going to swing very violently across the boat. You generally don't want this to happen. It's stressful on the boat, and if anyone is in the way of that boom's going to knock them hard. So as the wind was blowing the bow downwind, this was putting me at risk of an accidental jibe. So as I'm standing in the middle of the cockpit with my hands occupied, I realized that this was happening. So I turned to my right to reach behind me to get the wheel of the boat so that I could turn the boat back into the wind. Only there were two problems. One is that I was doing this too late. The mainsail the wind had already caught the other side of the mainsail as I was doing this. So while I thought that I was going to be steering the boat back into the wind had caught the sail already, and the boom had already started to move. That was one problem. Another problem is that because it was winter and I was bundled up, I had on a neck gaiter, which is like a sock kind of for your neck and for your head. And so it goes around my neck to keep my neck warm, and I had it pulled up like this around my head. And with that wrapped, and you'll see this in a lot of the videos, if you look at my channel, you'll see that I wear neck gaiters all the time in the summer and the winter. So I had the gaiter up on my head like this, so my peripheral vision was compromised. In addition, I had the hood from my jacket, which was my foul weather jacket, I had that up as well. I actually had this hat on at the time with my gaiter like this underneath my hat. So that's blocking my peripheral vision, and then a big hood from my jacket blocking my peripheral vision. So while I'm reaching behind me to grab the wheel to turn the boat back into the wind, the boom had already started to move, and because my peripheral vision was compromised, I didn't see it, and I didn't hear it. And so as I'm doing this is when the boom swung across, and it smacked me in the back of the right side of my head. So my head was turned back like this, and the boom came across and hit me on the back side, right side of my head, on my ear, and right behind, like where my glasses are. I didn't have these glasses on. I have these other glasses that I wear when I'm sailing, and it hit there. So the boom slammed me hard on the right side, right rear side of my head. One of the fortunate things is that my ear actually caught the brunt of the impact. So all this cartilage here cushioned the blow of the boom hitting my head. So by the time I got some medical attention, my ear was just swollen huge, and I had a large lump on the back of my head about the size of a I don't know, maybe between the, I don't know, about the size of a softball, I guess I would say, or maybe a little bit less, between the size of a baseball and a softball. Had a big giant lump on the back of my right side of my head, right behind my ear. So when the impact happened, it knocked me to the ground immediately. I hit the deck. I was completely shocked. I had no clue that the boom had swung across and was coming my way. So, you know, I guess it would be one thing if you could see it coming and then it hits you, you realize what happened. I didn't see it coming because I was turned away when the boom hit me. So I had no idea that this had happened. So it was just completely shocking to me. I had a microphone like you see here, clipped on the edge of my hat, and when I got hit, it knocked that microphone off. You know, it's clipped right here, but it knocked it off into the water. I didn't realize that immediately, but afterward I figured out that, oh, my mic got knocked off. This hat sort of kind of got knocked, and I was completely bewildered. Fortunately, I did not lose consciousness. So I was able to get myself back up, realize that I got hit by the boom, and get control of the boat. That was number one, get control of the boat. From there, once I get control of the boat, I can then bring the sails down and then proceed to do what I need to do to get this boat into port, into the slip, and get off to the hospital. I did three things right away. First, I got control of the boat. I think at that point I did steer it into the wind, get the bow into the wind. Two, I called the marina. So I called for my sailing club. We have a dock master who kind of oversees who's got which boats when they went left and when they're coming back, that kind of thing. I called the dock master immediately and told him what happened, so that he could prepare the slip for me as I was coming back in, and also look for me to assist in me docking the boat. And then I called my wife to tell her what was going on, and then started thinking that I need to get myself to a hospital. I need to get myself to an emergency room. So I got the boat. However I handle it, I got the boat into the wind. I was able to bring the sails down properly. I was able to secure the boat. I brought her back into the marina. I had the dock master there to help me. He helped me get the boat settled, and then I gathered all my things and well, first of all, I had to decide what I wanted to do. So I had to decide, do I call an ambulance? Do I try to get myself to the hospital? What if I pass out? You know, what do I do? I sort of talked a little bit to the dock master about this. I was cognizant. I didn't feel like I was going to pass out. But so I knew that I was kind of okay for the moment, but there was a risk that I could feel bad getting myself to a hospital. All that said, I chose to drive myself to the hospital rather than get an ambulance. If I were bleeding, I wasn't bleeding. If I were bleeding, or if I had sort of blackouts, or if my vision had been compromised, or what have you, if I would, like, let's say I wasn't seeing out of one eye, I probably would have called an ambulance. But in this case, I otherwise felt pretty good, other than the big lump on my head and my swollen ear. So I decided to drive myself. So I got myself to a hospital, into an ER, and then they started looking at me. And I ended up getting scanned, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So let's see, the extent of the injury was where it hit me, the area of impact. Oh, there was an interesting thing that happened when I got hit. My sense of time was very much altered. The moment I got hit and I hit the deck, and I was sort of, you know, discombobulated and trying to like pick myself up, realize what happened, pick myself up, get a sense of the boat, get control of the boat. For me, in my head, that took, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 seconds, maybe not 30, but like 10 or 20 seconds for me to like get my bearings and sort of get back up again. But when I watched the video back, it went like that. It's like I got hit and boom, I sprung up immediately. I was right back up on my feet and I was taking action to handle the boat. When I watched the video back, that's what happened. But in my head, it moved much more slowly. I was like gaining awareness of what happened and like moving far slower than what actually happened in the video. So that was a really interesting thing to realize. Another thing that I realized is that when I got hit, my mind immediately started trying to figure out how, like when and where I got hit. My perception was that I was on the starboard side of the boat and I got whacked when I was sort of further on the starboard side of the boat, playing with those lines I was talking about. But in actuality, I was more centered in the middle of the boat, reaching back like I described. So when the boom hit me, if you can imagine, it was at, I don't know, let's say a 90-degree angle, although it wasn't fully at a 90-degree, off to the port side of the boat. As it swung around, it hit me when I was right in the middle of the boat, which was actually a good thing, relatively speaking. I think had I been further on the starboard side of the boat, and that boom had had more area to go before it hit me, it would have hit me much harder. And who knows, I may have been knocked unconscious. But I guess what I'm saying is that the angle of travel for the boom was less than what my perception of it was. So that was another good thing I realized from the video. Again, I didn't have any bleeding, and I wasn't rendered unconscious, and I had no other injuries. It could have been far worse, of course. I could have been knocked unconscious. I could have been bleeding internally, externally. I could have fractured my skull. I could have bit my tongue. You know, who knows what could have happened. None of those things happened, fortunately. So I drove myself to a hospital. I got myself to an ER. From the time of injury until the time I was able to get into the hospital and speak to somebody was about an hour and a half. So 90 minutes from point of impact to getting to the ER. Then from the ER to actually getting scanned took another hour and a half. So I saw a doctor, I saw nurses. They were trying to get an assessment of what had happened to me. I was explaining to them, and then they ordered a CT scan. But it took a while of just sitting, waiting with an ice pack on my head for them to get me back and scanned. So it took about another hour and a half. So from point of impact until the time in which I was scanned was 3 hours. Then, of course, it took even more time to get the results from the CT scan. So I was sitting around waiting to hear what they had to say. Fortunately, super good news. I had no brain trauma. I had no internal bleeding. I had no skull fracture. Everything checked out. The doctor was very confident that like nothing had happened. Nothing serious had happened. The only thing she said really about my ear, because it was so swollen, is that there was a potential that I would end up with a cauliflower ear. Although when she looked at it closely, she said, I don't think that will happen, but there's a possibility that that could happen. And it ended up not happening. All that swelling over the course of several days went down, and my ear is pretty much back to normal. So in terms of recovery, it took me about a week for all the swelling to go down. So I had swelling, like I said, in my ear and in the back of my head, big lump. I'd say after about There's a chair over there that's about to fall down in the wind. After about 4 days, the swelling had gone down significantly. I had been icing it and just resting quite a bit. And so all of that swelling went down. But I'd say from the point of injury until the point where I did not have any further sensitivity whenever I would touch my head, took about a week. So, some lessons learned. What would I do differently in the future to ensure that this does not happen again? So, I would do a few different things. The first is, and this is a note to myself as much as it is to anyone else, respect your training. In ASA, like I said, 101, 103, 104, you are taught when bringing your sails down, point the bow into the wind. That is the safest way to bring your sails down. Respect your training, particularly if you are trying to do something, let's see, you are in a situation in which you are compromised. So I was in cold weather. It was February. I was not thinking clearly after a long day of sailing and in the cold weather. So in cold, you don't think as quickly as you normally do, and you may not be thinking as clearly as you normally do. So knowing that I had had a long day of sailing and I was cold, or in the cold, I should say, I should have been just following my training rather than trying to do something experimental that I had never tried before. So respect your training. Be careful about doing experimental things when you are solo. So like I just said, when solo, don't try experimenting things when you are in any sort of compromised way. Prepare for it. Know what you're going to do. Know what you're going to do if something goes wrong. Be very careful about doing experimental things when you are solo. You might even wait until you have crew in order to do something experimental so that if something goes wrong, you've got somebody there to help you. Be aware of where the boom is at all times. One of my mistakes was losing sight of the boom. So even though I was doing something experimental and I was, I was in a compromised situation, one thing I never should have done is take my eyes off the boom. So when I was working those lines and I was trying to steer, I should have been aware of where the boom was, and I wasn't. I turned my back to it. I didn't see where it was, and so when it hit me out of the blue, or from my perspective it was, I had no indication it was coming toward me. I didn't see it coming. Like I mentioned, my peripheral vision was compromised. That's a bad thing. Always watch where the boom is. Always know where it is. Always know where it could go. And finally, just for yourself and for your loved ones, be as safe as you possibly can. I think that's what this picture adds up to. So make sure that you have proper safety gear, make sure you have resources, you have phone numbers, you have someone you can reach out to, you have, if this were a different situation where I might have had to use emergency radio, having these things at the ready so that you can respond when a situation occurs. Along those lines, I want to point out that I was wearing my Apple Watch. I have an Apple Watch Ultra. And when I got hit and I was able to get back up off the ground, when I made the 2 phone calls that I made, I did them with my watch. I didn't have to go digging for my phone. I just said to my watch, "Hey Siri, call so-and-so." And I was...
Sorry, I can only call one person at a time.
The point being, you get my point. I was able to talk to my watch and tell it to make a phone call to the dock and do that hands-free without having to go dig down into the cabin and find my phone. I did it from my watch, which was pretty convenient. And I was also able to make that call to my wife from the helm as I was making my way back into the marina. So having something like that, I'm not saying you should have an Apple Watch, but I'm saying you want to have gear or resources or safety equipment available to you for you to act with and respond with and know how to use those tools when you find yourself in a serious situation. So with all that, I hope that helps. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. I will try to address those. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope that this never happens to you, and if it does, that you have the resources, the wherewithal, the tools to respond in the case of an emergency to keep yourself and your loved ones as safe as possible and treated as quickly as possible. With that, I'm Darren, aka Skipper D. Fair winds.